Yama explorers. So we're going to have a look at sense of place. Sense of place is something which is, it's something that if you talk to our indigenous populations or our Aboriginal people, myself included, it's something that is really important to us. We wouldn't call it sense of place. We'd call it sense of country. However, I don't care who you are. I think it's something that's a really important part of being a human. So our sense of place or our sense of country is something that is to do with feeling connected to where you are, where you're from, or where you are in particular, maybe not where you're from, maybe where you're living right now, and having a sense of what that place is. What does it mean to be in that space? So, for example, our town over the last 20, 30 years has spent a lot of time sort of reinvigorating their connection to our long and rich Aboriginal cultural heritage of the Wiradjuri people. We spent a lot of time really starting to celebrate that, and it's actually changed the culture. It's changed that sense of place or sense of country for our Aboriginal community members, but also for our non-Aboriginal community members. Like they feel as though a lot of the people, when you look at the stuff which is around our town, the services around our town, the people around our town, the built environment, the natural environment, they have a real sense of a place which goes back not just a couple hundred years from a colonial invasion or settlement, but much, much further back. And that's something which has been quite intentional. So we see our sense of place can not just be something which occurs organically, it can also be something which humans have decided to improve upon and make better and sort of reconnect with that sense of place, develop an identity. And that's what sense of place is. Sense of place is an identity that you have with where you are, either right now or where you're from or where you live. And that's what we're going to talk about now. So this is your vocabulary. If I get you to pause the video here and write down all this so you've got this information to come back to as we move through the lesson. So let's have a look at the first law of geography. So everything is related to everything else, but near things are more related than distant things. That's from a guy called Waldo Tobler, who's an American geographer and explorer. And basically what it's saying is that everything interacts with everything else, right? But you interact more and more with the things you're nearby. So here we have a map of the not just the Wiradjuri, of all indigenous nations in Australia, the Aboriginal nations, and Torres Strait Islander nations. So, for example, on this map we have countries which are close by, right? And they would have interacted a lot. But we have countries which are further away. And so, for example, if you're at the very, very tip of Australia, you're not interacting much with the Wiradjuri people down here, necessarily. But we're still interrelated, right? Because there are interactions that are happening in neighbouring nations and interactions between nations which are a bit further apart. But this nation in the middle, it's going to be interacting with nations, again, further apart there. And so we can see how everything is related, but the further away you are, you're just more distant, right? So that makes sense. So you're less related, but they're still related nonetheless. And I think that's actually a really important thing, not just to talk about in geography, but as humans. There is, however, something called distance decay, and that's the effect of distance on sort of cultural and spatial interactions. In other words, the further away things are, the less they'll interact. Doesn't mean they don't interact, it just happens less. So we want to talk about a sense of place. So each place has a unique identity that makes it its own, right? Like it makes it different from other places. If you've lived in multiple towns, you will generally understand that there are things which are the same from town to town to town, but those towns are all different from each other. And if you start living in a bunch of different towns in a different country, you'll see again, those towns are more similar to each other than the towns that we were originally at, but you know, there's still an interaction. And one of those interactions is you. You moved from town A to town B in nation A to nation B. Okay, so each town has its own, or each place has its unique identity, but it's closer to those that it's in identity to those that's nearby, and you know, there's interactions in between. So that's kind of cool. So there's a combination of characteristics that make a place. and these are what make an individual. And those tend to be your natural features, so your rivers, your climate, how hot it is. And that makes sense, right? So we're back to closer places are going to be more closely related, more similar. Okay, particularly, like this town and the town 30 kilometers down the road, they got the same climate. But then we've got the human features, right? So that's your culture, your buildings, employment, schools, all that sort of nonsense, right? Like all that are your human features. So those two things combined, that's what makes your sense of place. And it's also to do with the individuals and how you interact with a place in different manners. So this means that you and your family will have a fairly similar sense of place, but not the same as each other. Yet you and a person from another family are going to have a different sense of place of the same town, the same place. So sense of place is fairly individual, but there are characteristics which exist within a community. So that's a pretty quick one. I hope that made sense. If you have any questions, put them in the comments below. And remember, keep exploring, and we'll see you next time. Bye now.